With a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for Tom's successful exploratory surgery there that has given the doctors the chance to discover what direction to go, and we pray that you bless the testing that's going on right now, that soon they'll be able to prescribe a treatment program that will be a blessing to his life, as was the treatment program 25 years ago that restored him to health and has given him years without the disease. We pray that you would grant your blessings to Antonia as she lives among us for a while, that she would thrive and prosper and grow and enjoy this time that she has here. We pray especially for her blessings as she starts school. We ask that you would bless our study of this amazing book that you've given us through the Apostle Paul, that we would learn and grow ourselves, that new things would challenge us, and that your word would comfort us, that your Holy Spirit would empower us to live our lives for you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, so we're in Romans chapter 12, and we are down at about verse 9, I think, is where we were ready to pick back up. So we made this shift where St. Paul is talking about offering ourselves as a living, holy sacrifice. The sacrifices of the Old Testament were a way that someone could come to God and through the offering of the sacrifice offer thanksgiving to God and receive God's blessings in an exchange that was not the exchange of the heathens who thought they were feeding their gods and maybe talking them into granting blessings to them, but rather for the Israelites this thank offering, I'm giving up a tiny portion of what you gave to me to show how much I thank you for what you've given me, and as a place where I will have a strong sense of even more blessing flowing to me, a kind of a circular thing going on there. So Paul says, forget about the small portion that's a token. Give yourselves, your whole self. And the way you do that is not by, putting yourself on the altar like Isaac or something like that. But the way that you do that is by being transformed from a person of this world to a person who belongs to God in every way, seeking and living what the will of God is for your particular life, not just life in general, but me, the one that God gave gifts to. And then he talks about those gifts. He says, for each person, this is going to be different. There are going to be people who are in positions of leadership that will lead. There are going to be people with generosity who are going to give. They're going to be hospitable people who welcome people and host them. They're going to be people who serve. They're going to be people who teach, and so forth. And so we've gone through all of that in these verses down through 8. And the point there was, whatever the gift, do that thing. Don't and do it with great joy in your heart as God's gift to you and as God's gift to the community through you. Don't hold back. The idea here is that you don't put some sort of a governor on. Sometimes you'll see a truck on the highway that says that the speed is governed, that they can't go over 65 miles an hour or whatever. There's some kind of a thing in there. In the old days, it was a physical plate of some kind in the carburetor or, in the the throttle somehow. And now it's probably done by computer, but, it just can't go any faster than that. So this truck is underperforming as far as speed is concerned. Paul doesn't want us to have some kind of a limiter on us that says, well, I'll give, but I'll only give this much. I'll serve, but I'll only serve on these days. I'll teach, but only this many classes a year, or whatever it might be. He says, just if that's your gift, use that gift. Don't be afraid. So he's talking about a life that's lived to the full.
Enthusiastically.
Yeah. It's You've seen the opposite, and maybe you even lived the opposite, where someone is begrudging, Oh, well, I guess I don't really want to do this thing. I guess I'll do it. Sometimes that's a false modesty thing, and sometimes that's really just this underperforming. This choice to not give 100%. But the folks that really make a difference in the world are the ones that just go at it with enthusiasm, with a sense that they're on a mission. If you've had teachers like that over the years, oh my goodness, what a difference that makes. I can remember through my lifetime, I had teachers that were actually interested in the thing that they were teaching. And then I've had teachers that literally I could have done a better job. I think of one in particular in a science class in 8th grade where I just wanted to say, will you just get out of the way? I'll teach this. Because she didn't know the material. She hadn't tried to grasp it. And it was obvious she was just in the wrong place. Now, that might not have been her fault. They might have assigned, an English major to teach science that year or something. I don't know. But you've seen what it's like when the opposite occurs. So why would you allow yourself to do that thing? To, either, if you're a teacher, Paul doesn't say, he who teaches, let him lead. He who gives, let him host. So Paul says, don't let yourself be put into the wrong slot. And when you're in the right slot, just go for it. Go for it. What a difference that can make. And, for most of the people in the room, not Antonia, and maybe James, and a few others, but for most of the people in the room, you'd have to go back in time as far as your work life is concerned to take this advice. If you said, I really was doing the wrong thing all these years. And I don't know what you guys have done in your careers, but from what I can tell from the stories that Weldon tells, he was in the right place. He liked doing what he did. Customer service with the airlines, he was good at it. He went at it. He charged at it. He did that thing, and that was a great thing. Others of you may look back at your time and say, "Oh, really?" Like the experience I had at the seminary when I started my doctoral program. They gave us this personality profiling thing, and then on the last day of the orientation, they brought those results back to us and shared. Each one of us got our results, and then the guy who did the testing, Bruce Hartung, and this is far enough back, he did this on an overhead projector. So he took each person's results, blacked their names out where you couldn't see who it was, and then he put it up on the screen, and he talked about the patterns of these results. And the very first one he put up was mine. And he talked about this shape, if you follow the dots in this graph, this shape that it created, and went all the way through it. And then he finished up saying, someone with this profile wouldn't usually be a pastor. He'd probably be an architect. And I thought, missed my calling, doggone it. So, gee, it's just too bad you're stuck with me. But if you need a good architect, just let me know, right?
You're building.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah, and here we're pretty well designing from the ground up. So no, just teasing. So anyway, so this is what these first few verses of Romans are driving at here. And then we get to verse 9. So he's continuing the same theme, but now he's moving in a slightly different direction. So, and I think we're going to have to read some of this stuff, even though it's divided in many cases with just semicolons. I think we're going to want to do this verse by verse. So someone read verse 9 for us.
Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good.
Yeah. My translation says, let love be without hypocrisy. And there's a good reason for that, because that's exactly what it says in the Greek. Agape, love. Anhupokritos, not hypocritical. So a hypocrite, when Jesus calls the Pharisees hypocrites, that's the Greek word for actor. It's someone who is pretending to be somebody other than who they really are. If you're an actor, you put aside your personality and you take on a different personality. You may be made up, even disguised, to look differently. You're not yourself anymore. You're somebody else. And anytime in the Greek that someone is standing outside of themselves and being somebody else, that's hypocrisy. You notice that Jesus thought that was a really bad thing. I don't think he was saying that the craft of being an actor was a bad thing. But if that's how we're living our daily life, then it's a bad thing. He says, let love be without hypocrisy. Don't just say, I love you. Don't put a saccharine smile on your face, as though you loved someone else, although really, There's a couple of books that were written back in the 70s, I think, that talk about the early days of Christian ministry deep into Papua New Guinea, where there were still cannibals. And in fact, the first book follows the story of several missionaries that were actually eaten by cannibals. And then the second book is called Peace Child. And it just continues the story. The first one's called Lords of the Earth. The second one's called Peace Child. And it talks about this society there in Papua New Guinea where many of the tribes bought into this idea that the most fun there was, the greatest thing to do, would be to betray someone. That was how they got their thrills. Well, they didn't have television, so they got their thrills by betrayal. And so it goes through this story of how a guy from one tribe bumps into a guy from another tribe kind of out in the woods somewhere, and he's quite a bit on the defensive, but this other guy seems to think, not so very different, and maybe we could get along. And he cultivates a friendship with him, and they and he talks about how wouldn't it be better if our tribes were at peace with each other, and we're going to get to know you better and stuff. And this guy's just eating it up. He's loving it because he's lived his life in fear, out in the woods and stuff. And so then he kind of brings him to his village, and the people in the village treat him with kindness and respect, and it's all cool. And then one day they invite him to a banquet to honor this and to move forward and bring our whole tribes together. And he comes to the banquet, and everybody is there, and they're all smiling and everything. And then he sees something's not just quite right. And eventually he realizes that the main course is him. And the grins on their faces and the pleasure they were taking at that great trick they had played on him, and now it cost him his life. That's hypocrisy. Okay? Now, that's at its, at its worst form. But yes, exactly. They thought Judas was the hero of the story. Exactly. When they first heard the story of the gospel, they thought that it was driving at Judas. Yeah, so you've read about this too. Yeah. If you can imagine. All right. Now, obviously, Judas isn't the hero of the story, and what the Christian faith is about is no pretending. Tell the truth. Let love be without hypocrisy. When we use the word love, we can talk about the love between a husband and a wife, or the love of parents for children, our love for God. And we can also talk about our love for a good steak that's just truly, really right on the borderline between medium and medium rare, And it's got just the right amount of fat, but it's a pretty lean steak, so you don't feel it's too healthy. But boy, the taste that it has there. Oh my goodness. So you know what I'm talking about? I love that. Oh, sorry about that. Well, we'll turn it into tofu or something. So that idea, though, of love meaning I'd like to eat you up, Maybe your great aunt said that to you when you were little, and she got you by both cheeks. Said, "Oh, you're so sweet. I'd love to just eat you up." Well, this is the really I'd love to eat you up kind of thing. That's not love. That's not agape, as we know the Greek word. This one of the Greek words that's used for love. He says, let that be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. We live in a society that is turned upside down, where we praise and magnify what is evil. It's constant. We have been fed a steady diet over the last 50 years in our literature, if not much longer than that, but I mean a really steady diet over the last 50 years of good is bad and bad is good. And I think I've told you guys before about my dad's puzzlement in the early 70s when he came home from the movie theater having seen The Sting. And my dad was just kind of scratching his head and saying, there weren't any good guys in the movie. And he said, you wind up cheering for the crooks because the cops are worse than the crooks are. And there's one set of crooks that you're cheering over the other set of crooks. And he hadn't been to a movie like that before, John Wayne usually played the good guy. If he played the bad guy, you knew he was the bad guy. You felt a little sympathy for him, but by golly, that was it. He was the bad guy. And most of the time, he was the good guy, and you knew who the bad guys were. And then here you are, and you got a movie where nobody's the good guy. Well, if you look at our film literature over the last 50 years, that's what it is. Think of the great success of things like the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Who are the good guys? Certain of the pirates are the good guys. Who are the bad guys? Well, there are some pirates that are bad guys, but all of the government officials, the sailors and soldiers of the Navy and the Marines and things like that, they're all bad guys. All. Okay? It just goes on and on and on and on. We're being told bad is good, good is bad. And what St. I mean, you just look at the culture around us, and every advertisement is based on one of the 7 deadly sins, basically. They're after you gluttony or sloth or something, right? Tell me the last time you saw a food advertisement, a restaurant or whatever, that wasn't directed at overindulgence in stuff that you know is going to kill you. And we've looked at, we've seen the articles that show us that, how many calories are there in a Big Mac, versus how many calories are you supposed to eat in a whole day, right?
That's the whole day's equivalent.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah. How many grams of sodium, milligrams of sodium, and how much saturated fat, all this kind of stuff. And they put it up there and it's so juicy, and you just want that. You just want to ignore the fact that if you eat that, it's going to kill you. St. Paul says, abhor what is evil. If it's bad, stay away from it. Don't go near it. Hate it. Hate the evil there. Cling to what is good. Imagine if our society just tuned up to this about 10% from where it is. What a wonderful place we'd already be living in. I'd love to see us at 100%, each one in this room. But if our society just kind of got about 10% of that, we'd live in an entirely different world, where we'd say, well, that's bad, and so I'm not going near that. That's good. I'm going to hold that close to me.
There is no absolute truth. There's no absolute truth. Why? You say it's bad, and the other guy says, no, it's not bad.
Yeah. That's been part of the campaign. As you've built the idea that the bad guys are really good guys and the good guys are really bad guys, you've lost any sense of absolute.
Right, that's their truth. So this is your truth.
Exactly.
We know what the truth is. They don't.
The scriptures are quite clear, but in spite of all of it, human beings do have a God-given conscience, and they do know, just even if it's only vaguely and generally, what's bad and what's good. And all you'd have
can suppress it so much that they just.
I agree.
That they really.
I agree.
It's lost.
I agree.
I think it's actually.
Well, I
lost.
don't know that it. I guess I would say that it's reachable in there. That it can be reached in there.
Could be drawn back.
I mean, otherwise we'd have to say that God's creation has failed. It's there, but but just starting with Christians. This is talking to Christians. If we would just say, I know that's bad, I'm not going to do that. I know that's good, I'm going to do that thing instead. All right, let's just keep going through here. Verse 10, please.
Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Okay.
Yeah. The word there in verse 10 is Philadelphia. Philos, love. Adelphos is brother. So brotherly love here. This says that everyone should move to Philadelphia. Not physically, but everyone should move their hearts to the love of the family for those around you. He's talking again specifically to Christians, and he says, love one another with brotherly love. Imagine it's St. Matthew. If, for whatever reason, people have had differences with each other, they said, I'm going to do this thing. I am going to love this person as my brother or my sister. And I think it's a really good picture, brotherly love. Because, in families, that's what you have to do. When you're in a family, you know those other people quite well. You know the good points. You know the bad points. And you have had plenty of conflict with them growing up, unless you lived in a different family than I did. And yet, Lisa and her sisters used to sing that song, Sisters, Sisters, Roper. Yeah. And then the last verse says, God help the mister who comes between me and my sisters. Yeah.
Help the sister who comes between me and my man.
Well, there's that too, but I wanted to focus on the first part there. There's, God, in putting us into families, has given us a model for the next level out, which is the church. That, yes, I know my little brother's foibles and even outright sins. I've known what struggles he's gone through and how he's conquered some things and not conquered other things. And I love my little brother. I'm not just saying I have to love him, he's my brother. God has actually put into my heart a love for this person. If I were out picking friends, I might not pick David. I might say, no, that's, too different. And yet, I love my brother, and my brother loves me. And we won't even get into my sisters. Oh, my goodness. So, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. What I'm saying here, what I'm hoping to do right here, right now, is for you to be thinking about people at St. Matthew's. People that you've been in conflict with. And that this command says, so, you've been in conflict with them. So, what does it take for you to show brotherly love, sisterly love to that person? Give preference to one another in honor. This deep humility that says, I'm going to be more interested in someone else's advancement than I am in my own. This is how Christians are called to treat one another. And again, we really have to use our imaginations to imagine St. Matthew this way. Because no, this is a nice place. I'm not picking on St. Matthew as though it's like worse than all the other churches I've been at or something like that. I'm simply saying, St. Matthew, and that if just the people in this room took these things to heart, it would change St. Matthew. Different things would happen here, which is actually what I'm advocating here. Verse 11.
Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord.
Okay. Yeah.
Boiling over with the Spirit.
Yeah.
In all the times in which we are living, it's time for you to wake up. Our salvation is nearer now than...
Oh, you're not in the same verse we're in. Yeah, chapter 12, verse 11.
I'm in 13.
Yeah, that would explain something there. Now we know why it was completely different. Yeah, that's okay. I recognize that as not being in Romans 12, so okay, that's all right. So, it's okay. It's all right. But yes, this picture of
Sorry, Andy, I missed that
uh,
too.
so think about what it means to throw yourself into whatever it is that you're doing with zeal, with diligence, with a commitment that this is a thing that's worth doing. I will just pursue this. Fervent in the spirit. Your note says boiling over. Huh? Boiling over with the spirit. And serving the Lord. See, you see how Paul throws that in? He's picturing this bubbling, boiling over. Oh, let's go get it. This enthusiasm again that Bob was talking about. And then he just throws it in. Serving the Lord. If you knew it was Jesus right there, and you said, that's Jesus. And this thing that I'm doing for Jesus. Oh my goodness, Andy.
Makes me think of Peter because he would act boldly. And our new superintendent of Lutheran schools, that's one of the things he says, act boldly, ask for forgiveness later. Because you have the zeal and you have the passion, but you don't always think about the other consequences till after.
Yeah. Well, right. That's kind of getting at the problem that if you really pursue things, there may be some collateral damage along the way. We do want to be careful about those things, but that's why it's not just enthusiasm; it's diligent enthusiasm. But when you're talking, especially to Missouri Synod Lutherans in 2018, we have a tendency to overthink things and never actually pull the trigger. Back in the 90s when Al Berry was the president of Synod, there was this theme that was supposed to run through, and he was hoping through several terms of presidency. Of course, he died very suddenly. But it was get it straight, Missouri. And then there was supposed to be a get it out, Missouri. Okay? So first of all, make sure you got all your doctrine straight. Well, we spent 10 years and never got out of the get it straight, Missouri, to the get it out, Missouri. And then he died before we ever got to get it out, Missouri. We have a problem with that. Let's make sure we got all our ducks in a row. Let's make sure we've got everything lined out very carefully. And then we're going to act, by golly. It may not be in my generation, but we're going to act. No, not quite. Fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Again, who's your audience? If you're playing your life out in front of some audience, if all the world's a stage and all the people are players, right? Shakespeare's right about that. Who's your audience? And St. Paul would say, well, your audience is Jesus and the angels. That's the ones that should be the only audience you're seeking to please. Now, in seeking to please Jesus and the angels, we'll do wonderful things for people. But some of those things they might not understand. And they might be confused by some of our actions. But serving the Lord. Okay? Verse 12.
Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer.
Okay? All right. Rejoicing in hope. When we think about what hope means, I like the definition that says that hope is the present certainty of a future reality. That's what it means to hope. So if I walk into the building and I say, gee, I hope it isn't pouring down rain when I walk outside, is that hope? No. We're using the word hope, but we're not using it the way the Bible uses it. We can't connect the wishful thinking idea with the Bible word hope. They are not related to each other. Hope means I am now letting my attitude and my actions be governed by what I know is going to come next. And so because I have hope of heaven, because I know that 100 years from now I'll be in heaven, that's what drives my joy now. Whatever kinds of problems are in my life, however things are going in my family, whatever's going on with my health and my job and all of those kinds of things, those things are not strong enough to overcome this certainty that I will see the face of Jesus and be welcomed into his loving arms and will be reunited with the people that I love sometime in the next 100 years. I used to say 100 years, now I can say next 50 years and be pretty certain about that. So when he says rejoicing in hope, he's talking about letting this future certainty, the certainty about the future, govern the way I act now. Instead of letting whatever's happened in the last 5 minutes decide how I act now. Because that's, of course, the temptation, isn't it? I'm going to let, the fact that somebody cut me off in traffic determine my mood for the next hour, right? That person is already at work and so am I, but I'm going to let that determine how I feel for the next hour, because he was a jerk, right? And consequently, I should let a jerk decide how I'm going to feel and how I'm going to act around the people that I spend time with. That doesn't really make sense, does it? It rings true, doesn't it? But it doesn't really make sense. What St. Paul says is, when I get up in the morning, I say, another day closer to heaven. Jesus is on his way back. He might get here before I get there, or I might get there before he comes here, but Jesus is on his way back. And I'm going to live with him. I can see his smile now. And I can see my grandma and great-grandma and my grandfather and my father and my sister and all of those folks. I can see their smiles too. Yeah, right, he made it. Yeah. Maybe a little bit puzzled smile. I was like, really? He made it? Wow. But, and that's what tells me what my mood should be. This joy thing. I've done studies before on the difference between happiness and joy. Happiness, when we sing happy birthday to someone, we're saying we hope that the circumstances of your year are happy happenstances. We hope that your haps, which is the English word behind happy and happen and happenstance, that your haps will be pleasant ones. And we do wish that for people. It is perfectly appropriate for us to wish them a happy birthday and a happy year, a happy new year, right? We wish that. Perfectly appropriate. Somewhat irrelevant. Because our haps, our daily occurrences, are not in charge of our joy. Our joy comes from hope, not from happenings. And that's what Paul is driving at here. Persevering in tribulation. That's one of my favorite words in the Greek. tribulation is the word flipsis. Say that real easy with TH. Flipsis. I just love that word. I'm not sure why I love that word, but I love flipsis. So that's the word for tribulation. Paul says that in tribulation we persevere. We say, okay, all right, that's the way it is right now. This is what I got to do. This is what I got to go through. But, I'm on my way to heaven. This is not all that important that this is kind of tricky, unpleasant, or, hard to do. And so I'm just going to keep doing it. I think of some of the times that I've been deep down inside the car, way up in the engine somewhere, or in the suspension, and realizing that having started to take this thing apart, it's going to be hours, and the outcome is uncertain. Least, yes. Might as well tell the story. We were at my parents' house, the house I grew up in my teenage years in Ocala. A friend of mine had bought an old Volkswagen that I had, and then he'd paid me for about not even half of it, and then he just abandoned it in my parents' backyard because it got jammed in between two gears, and I didn't want to have to pull the engine out. So I thought, well, I know what's happened. The reverse gear, the actuator for that is sticking out, and third gear at the same time. I knew what was going on there. And so I had this idea, because I knew how this was constructed, that if I could pull the backup light on the Volkswagen was actuated actually by the end of the thing that made it go into reverse gear. So it would push out on this. And I thought, if I could pull the backup light switch out and stick something in there and push on that until it clicks and get this thing unstuck from these gears. Well, of course, what I'm talking about is absolutely amidships of this Volkswagen. And so I climb underneath the car. Lisa was in the kitchen with my mom talking. And I climb underneath and I pull the backup light switch out. And I try to get something up in there to push that back in. Well, there was car here, and you just couldn't get there. So finally I thought, well, if I could push on it even with my finger hard enough, and it turned out that only my little finger would actually make the turn and get into the hole. And I'm pushing as hard as I can in this threaded hole with my finger, and I just can't make it work. So I decide to take my finger out of that hole. Well, when you push into a threaded hole, and then when you try to pull out, ever had those Chinese handcuff things? Yes. So here I am, I'm underneath the car, and I cannot get enough pull on my little finger to get it out of there. I was pushing really hard. Yeah, you knew that was coming. And so there I am. And finally, I just yell Lisa's name as loud as I can. Now she's, 40 yards away, in the kitchen. And somehow, when I yelled like the third time, she heard me. And she came out there. And all she could picture was that the firefighters would have to cut the car in two to get it apart to get me out from underneath there. But I said, I think if you crawl underneath here.
Of course, I'm in my Sunday dress and nylon.
Yes. I said, if you'll crawl underneath here beside me and reach up and pull the skin of my finger like this with your finger, I think I can get out of here. And sure enough, she did. And it was a long time, thread by thread, pulling my finger out of there. But she finally got it out. And she still says I owe her a pair of nylons. Now I have bought her, I mean, even myself gone to the store and bought nylons, which is, yes, several times, and she still says I owe her a pair of nylons, you know. But so maybe that's a perseverance of a different kind that I'm talking about. But
Kind of above and beyond.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That was not in my marriage vow.
that was for worse. That's what that was. Okay. But anyhow, what I'm talking about is there are times when you know that whatever it is that you're trying to do is not going to be easy. And you either have to abandon it or persevere. Now, when tribulation comes, when, oh, yeah.
It went back to.
Yes, she's been, I'm sure I saw that she was being good at keeping it alive there,
Yes.
but every now and again it's going to get away from
Give
you.
us that website later.
Yeah. So when tribulation comes, then you're not in control, right? You know, if I decide I'm going to tackle my engine, I have another option. I can take it to the people that work on engines, right? Let them worry with it. But when tribulation comes, you know, when persecution comes, what St. Paul's saying here is that still you say, I will see this through to the end because I've got this hope and I know how it turns out. You know how when you open up the Dove chocolates, they have a little saying in them? I saw one that said, it'll all turn out right in the end. If it's not turning out right, it's not the end. And I thought that's, you know, in an earthly way, that's not really true. But for Christians, that actually is true. It actually is true. So persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer. Do you see the connections as we move from one thing to another? We can persevere in tribulation because we're rejoicing in hope. But when we're persevering in tribulation, that's what devotes us to prayer. Now we're not just, you know, going through the motions and saying the words. Now we're praying as though our life depends on it, because it does. Verse 13.
Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality.
Yeah, contributing to the needs of the saints. And practicing hospitality. Both of these things come together here. That in both cases, what we're talking about is I have resources, someone else has needs. What am I going to do about that? What am I going to do about that? St. Paul says that when we see others, especially other Christians, in need, then we find a way to help. When we take a door offering to buy repairs for the van so Suzanne can get Aaron or to her doctor's appointments and different things like that, or practicing hospitality. You remember the old days when a choir from a Concordia would come through and you would house them in your houses instead of, whatever happened to that?
You can't do it anymore.
In Orlando, people always want to visit Orlando, every year, every 2 or 3 of them wanted to, and out of 500 people that came to church every Sunday, finding a dozen that would house people in their homes. What's happened to our sense of hospitality? You know that as a pastor, I've eaten at 3 homes in this congregation. There's one, and I've eaten at Van Lente's. I think it's just 3. I've been here 6 months. Okay. Do you remember the days when the pastor pretty well knew that he was going to be invited out to eat? You don't?
I think there's a generation, including myself, that didn't even know that was something.
Yeah. Well, When you get old like me, you're going to find out about
Now
it.
I know.
Yeah, yeah.
Guys, don't forget the Lutheran Church.
Yeah, right. Yeah. See, that's what we do instead. And I'm, I shouldn't draw a stark line there. Taking someone out to eat in a restaurant is, is an expression of hospitality too. Absolutely. But I think that hospitality is becoming a lost art among us, and I don't like that.
Pastor,
Yes.
my uncle was a pastor down in Indianapolis. This is years ago. He used to travel across the United States. He never stayed in a hotel.
Exactly.
Always they knew each other, and he used to have other pastors come in,
Yeah.
and stay at his place. So
Yeah.
it was just
Yeah.
never stayed at a hotel. He did a lot of travel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Something has happened to us since we've delegated hospitality out to the hotels and the restaurants. That's what we've done.
This came up in our LWML Bible study because while we were having the Bible study, someone came in and was in need. So my question is, because a lot of us are hospitable and we give to those in need, where's the balance between helping others and enabling others, the ones who keep coming back because they know
Mm-hmm.
they can get something?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give a long answer to that. How many of you have seen My Fair Lady? Rex Harrison, Audrey Hepburn. Okay, My Fair Lady, based on. That's okay, but it is one of the English language things you should see at some point. Yeah, an old movie. Yeah, sorry, old movie. So based on George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion is the name of the play, and there's the character of Eliza Doolittle's father. You remember Alfred Doolittle? He's the garbage man, and as Eliza is being educated and things like that, Alfred is complaining about his own situation. And what he says is, because most of his problems are based on the fact that he likes to drink too much. And so his complaint is this. He says there are all these agencies here in London that are devoted to alleviating the difficulties of the deserving poor. The working poor, the folks that, just circumstances, an accident has kept them from being able to work full time, or medical bills, whatever it is. He says there's all these agencies that are devoted to helping the deserving poor. He says, where's the agency for helping someone like me, the undeserving poor? And ever since I read that line 50 years ago, I've thought about that. I cannot find anything in the Bible that says that we're supposed to help those in need who deserve to be helped. See, that's our problem, is we think that Jesus told us to help the deserving poor. He just told us to help the poor. What is it that Jesus says? Give to whoever asks you. That's what Jesus says. And this is a struggle. It was a daily struggle for us in downtown Orlando, because especially during the winter months, Florida has, I think, more homeless people than homed people. We had 2 ministries to the homeless right on our property. We knew them by name, and they knew us by name. We had plenty of contact with these folks, and there's this constant question that Andy's asking. So, how do we really help? But I think the starting point is that we desire to help. And the point at which we say, I'm not going to help, should be the point at which we've figured out that this help hurts. But the fact that I'm suspicious that this help might hurt is not good enough grounds. And I struggle with this all the time. The people with the cardboard signs, I do not like cardboard signs. I just don't like cardboard signs. I've spent some time with people that hold cardboard signs, and my consistent discovery has been that helping them doesn't help them. It only enables them to get drunk again. Okay.
Well, it's how you help them too. Often Rita carries water, granola bars in there.
Sure,
And
sure.
those-
Yeah. And in downtown Orlando, I've seen lots of those water bottles and granola bars on, uneaten and then drunk on the side of the road.
Okay.
So yes, it's a great thing to do. And there are some times when they will accept that kind of help and actually make good use of it.
Right.
But it is so difficult. And I think that if you and I would just say to ourselves, what was it at the end of the verse before, or 2 verses before? Serving the Lord. Remember Matthew 25. And as much as you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you've done it unto me, right? If we just think, there's the story of the burglar that breaks into the house, and it's pitch black dark. And he breaks into the dark and he hears a voice saying, Jesus is watching. And he just freezes, And then he moves a little bit. Jesus is watching, and he starts to get a little suspicious. So he flips on the light and he sees it's just a parrot. And the parrot says, Jesus is watching. And he turns and looks, and there's a Rottweiler. And the parrot says, that's Jesus. But,
And I, Antonio, knows what a
but Jesus is watching. And I don't know that we let that guide our actions as well as we ought to. So there's this grave difficulty that we know that we could literally, with a $5 bill, kill someone. That could be enough alcohol or drugs to put them in the grave. Absolutely. You can kill someone with a $5 bill. Also might kill them by withholding the $5 bill. That might be the last step before they would, yes. There's life and death stuff happening out there, and you and I are not thinking of it in the right terms. That's what this is about. This is not some prescription on how to do things. This is how should I be thinking about these things as I confront them? And what would it mean for me to actually care about the poor in my community? How would my church figure into what I do about that? We just do so many things without thinking, without listening to what God is actually saying and letting that be the thing that drives it. Oh.
Isn't that the real thing here? That, we forget that it's not just us.
Yeah.
It's us and God, that we need to be praying ahead. I mean, Jesus said, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. He also said, do not lean on our own understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, the Holy Spirit, and like you just said, listening to what God wants us to do and looking for His will and being led by the Spirit, that we should be led by the Spirit. And then we don't have to, these questions become more clear.
So often in life, what drives the problem is failure to prepare. And this is what gets me so often when there's someone begging in one way or another, and I haven't thought about it. I haven't prepared for, I haven't, many times I'll be past and gone from the encounter and realize, what I should have done instead was, well, you would think that might help me say, okay, the next time I'll be prepared. I'll have water and granola bars in the car, or something. St. Paul also talks about leaving room for the Spirit to act, and we often just fail to do that. But it's got to start off with this understanding that I'm serving the Lord, that my life is not just about what seems pleasant or doesn't seem pleasant to me at the moment. My life is about what God is calling me to do and what gifts he's given me and what resources he's put into my hands so that I can do what he's called me to do. If that was the thing that we opened our eyes with every morning, how would that change the rest of the interactions of the day? That's the question.
One more, if I can.
Yes,
one
please.
more thing. I think a lot of times you hear of people, paying it forward and all this worldly stuff, but how many times do we give glory to God for that ability to do those things? And that's where he is glorified, and that he's working through us and in us, and we need to introduce the world to Jesus. It's one thing to hand somebody a granola bar, but it's another to ask them, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Is there anything I can pray for you?
Yeah.
And introduce them.
Yeah.
I could be anyone. I don't, how do they know we're a Christian if we don't
Right.
even introduce them to Christ?
Right. Yeah, if you spend time with homeless people, and like I say, we had plenty of opportunity in downtown Orlando, their greatest need is to be treated as though they're actually persons. That's the number one thing. And if you do that in the name of Jesus, you've made an amazing difference. I have to tell you that the one ministry on our campus there was just a place where the homeless could come in for a few hours a day, out of the sun or out of the cold, what little cold we had in Orlando. In the mornings, they could come in at 8:30 for a Bible study, and after the Bible study, there'd be coffee, and there were some social agency kind of help there where they could, use a telephone to, or sometimes even a computer to apply for a job, whatever. And then in the afternoon, same thing, they could come in for a little while. Leading those Bible studies. Those folks knew more about their Bibles and had better questions than most of my Sunday morning Bible classes of my entire ministry. They were very much interested in the things of God because they didn't have anything else. Now, many of them were also paranoid schizophrenics who should have been institutionalized, but we're so enlightened now that we don't do that anymore. Most of them had mental illness and or drug dependencies of some kind or another that were putting them on the street. But if you actually spent time and dealt with them as human beings, except for the paranoid schizophrenics who, quite often were talking to some other person that you couldn't see, who was often making them very angry, and sometimes that would escalate into something pretty dangerous. But for most of them, just treating them like a human being and speaking to them kindly in the name of Jesus. What a difference that can make. But we've constructed our lives to where we don't have very many of those opportunities. We live in the suburbs. We've got our homes. We've got the police making sure they don't go down our streets in our neighborhoods. Right? Yeah. So it's an interesting question to say of myself, what gifts has God given to me, and where should I place myself to be in contact with people that have needs where I can serve Jesus? That's not usually how we decide to plan out our day. Well, there's just more of the same here, and we'll just come back for more of the same next week of these little short exhortations. At the beginning of the chapter, St. Paul has talked about being transformed, not conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewing of our mind. Now he's actually given us the details of that. This is what it would be like to live a transformed life if we actually loved without hypocrisy, if we abhorred what is evil and instead clung to what is good, if we were devoted to one another in brotherly love, and all of these things that we've been talking about. That's what it would be to be transformed.
It's like the Beatitudes.
Yes, it is. Yeah, because the Beatitudes talk about it in terms of how God sees the situations we're in. And if you pay attention to the Beatitudes, then this would be the way you would try to live your life. Yeah. I mean, they're told from a different perspective, but they are very closely connected. And interestingly, by the way, the Beatitudes are the organizing principle for the first month of our school chapels and things here like that. So if you want to explore that a little bit.
The Beatitudes are the whole year. That's the theme.
The whole year, yeah. Okay. So it's the B-attitudes there. Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to get a little bit of extra, just come on Wednesday mornings. This week it's at 11, but usually it's at 8:15. So feel free. Right? Okay. All right. Well, let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you that you have not just told us to be transformed, but you've actually shared with us through the Apostle Paul what that would look like. And we pray that we would take your words to heart, that each of us here in this room would take one special word from this and let that really settle into our souls, that it might make a difference in the way that we act, in the way that we treat other people around us, in the way that we relate to you and your church and the world around us. For Jesus' sake. Amen. Okay.